Okay, so let me kind of give you the context that we're going to do. The idea here is this. We're going to set up a workbook so that every time the user makes a change to a cell, we want to log the change that they made to a database. Imagine that, well, how many of you have had like an interview for a job where they like gave you a task to do in Excel? So it's like, here's something to do in Excel, go do it, and then we'll take a look at how you performed. Anyone have that experience yet? So it looks like just a handful of you did. So what did you feel like you shined with it, or would you like, oh boy, I don't know what to do? Oh, it's really a really simple thing to do. But just filtering out the folks who are like clueless. Okay, and how about you? Hard or easy? And it's pretty simple. I had a student come to me not long ago who was like, "Oh, Professor Allen, they've given me this data analysis to do in Excel, and I'm not quite sure what to do with it." It was a pretty hard task. But I can imagine myself, even if it was a simple one, I can imagine myself if I'm trying to figure out who's really good at this. It's not enough for me just to see what did they do on the end. I want to see everything they tried kind of along the way. Did they just kind of go right to it and know what they were doing, or did they have to kind of fiddle around to get it? And so that's the context here. As the person's working on the workbook, we want to be able to just log in a database what they're actually doing. And so, so that's the idea. So we have a workbook to start with, and I think I've got that downloaded and going here. So here's my workbook. Let me go ahead and bring up my VBA code. And let's see, this workbook, so module 1. It's the solution. I got some notes for myself, the Acme subrunner, record, edit, active cell. Okay. All right, so ultimately we'll have to get this to trigger automatically, but here's here's just my debugging code, but here's the thing that we're trying to do. We've got a subprocedure called record, edit. We're going to pass to it a reference to a worksheet and a reference to a range. And then we're going to open up a connection to a database. We'll insert some information into that database and then close the connection. So let's go ahead and look. So last time we were together, we saw how to like get this ADODB connection to connect to a database. Remember that we need to get a reference to the library that has these objects in it. So we're creating objects that are not native to Excel. So do I have a note in here that says, yeah, make a reference to the ADODB library? I'm not sure if we've made that reference here. Let's just go ahead and check. So I'll choose Tools, References. Yeah, and we don't have that connections made. It would be here at the top checked off. So we're looking for the Microsoft ActiveX Data Objects Library. So I'm going to scroll down until I find Microsoft ActiveX Data Objects Library. And there are several versions on this machine. I will choose the most recent version, which in my case is 6.1. It's probably the one you've got as well. So tick the little box next to it and say, okay. And that says to the Visual Basic Interpreter, hey, here's an object that you're allowed to reference. It's an object that we know about, so that we can create variables of that type. We normally can't just create a variable of ADODB.connection, but because we've included that link to the library, the Visual Basic Interpreter is going to say, ah, yeah, there is an object like that we can create an instance of. Now, before, we also had to have a record set object, because when we were reading the data, we had to get connected to the database, and then we had an object that says, here's the query, here's the set of records that we're going to work with. For what we're doing today, we're not bringing any data back. We're just pushing data to the database. And so we don't need a record set. There's no set of records that we're working with. We will use the connection object itself to execute a query. So the variable that's referring to that connection object is called CN. And what we can see is that down here, we're going to say cn.execute, and we're going to execute then the structured query language statement that we've built here. Now, at this point, what we're seeing is that this now is a structured query language insert statement. Let's just go ahead and in fact, maybe what I'll do is I'm going to copy this. I'll do this. Let me put a stop right here, and I'm going to run this code. So I'll come up to my sub runner and I'll run it. Oh, login failed. So I'm trying to connect here, and Login failed. Oh, shoot. VBA user. Let me come back and just look at my notes for just a second. Let me try this user. Only trouble is I'm not quite sure I know what the password is. Darn it. Oh, that connected okay. All right, so we're going to change the user name to gov_VBA. That should connect okay. What I'm really after here, I'm really just trying to get a clean copy of that SQL statement. So let me just, I've put a breakpoint in my code here, and I stopped here after I've defined that statement. And so here is like the insert statement. So I'm going to take this insert statement, and before I try to run it from my VBA code, I'm going to come back to our starting page, and I'm going to follow the link to the online query. And let's do this. So I just want to kind of look at this insert statement. So I've got select star from applicant. That is just showing me the data that's in my pool of applicants. And then I've got this insert statement. So there's a table called work log. It's got a username, workbook, column called workbook, a column called sheet, a column called address, formula, cell value. And now I'm going to supply values to go into those columns. So the username is going to be kworthen. The name I'm putting into the workbook is writedbxlsm. That's the name of the workbook. The worksheet is the next value, sheet 1. The formula is, or the address is A1. And then the formula is going to be the sum of, and that's just what's going into this table. So I'm just writing an entry into this table. But the insert statement is what does that. Now, select star from work log. Let me just order by, I think it's called the log ID. It's called event ID. I'm going to change the order of this to order by the event ID in descending mode. So I want to be able to see the most recently added event to this table. And just so I can see that it's me, instead of kworthen, I'm going to put G. Allen. And I will execute those 3 statements. They have semicolons separating them. Make sure I got a semicolon on the end of the second one. So it will show my list of applicants. Then it's going to insert a record into my work log table. Then it's going to show me the work log table with the most ordered by the event ID. And each time I enter a new record, it's going to generate a new event ID. It's just going to be numerically the next one higher. So because I'm ordering in descending order, the most recent one should show at the top. So I'll go ahead and submit this. Here's the results of the first query. It's showing me all of my applicants. Here's the results from that second query, just telling me that it succeeded. And then now we can see here's the one that I just executed with my username as the username. Looks like one other person beat me to it. Oh, that was me before class, just making sure this example still worked. But if someone else has executed this, if I were to only submit that select statement now, yeah, we've got a few other people. Really? You executed with my name instead of yours? Okay, I guess that's all right. Maybe someone will execute with their own name here. Not yet. We don't want to leave any clue that we were doing it. Okay. So, but that's the point. So it's just, executing the statement. We have the permissions to be able to insert a record with this account, and then we're able to see what's going on. Okay, and so now, and that is this username, gov_VBA, and with that double secret password. So that's setting up the connection string. So it's the same connection string, similar connection string that we had before. colonialbakehouse.com is my server. The database, we're using the SQL Server driver. The database is called VBA, and then I'm giving a user name and a password. Shortly here, we're going to go ahead and change this connection from the one that's working on the common SQL Server database that you can all access to just your own local copy of an access database. But we're going to leave that commented out for now. We're opening a connection. We're getting the SQL created. And I think right now I'll hard code this as someone else. Who's our new president? S. Reese. S. Reese. So I don't need that to be capital. Is it Reese? S-E? I don't even know how to spell his name. Well, it's going to be that. Okay, so now I'm going to go ahead and get rid of this. And if everything works right, that should insert a new record into that database that we could query over here and see it in our web interface. So I'm going to, again, come back up here to my sub runner, run this one because it's passing the needed arguments to my record edit. And if it runs without error, I should now see S. Reese is over here. Reese, and some of you ran it with the existing keyword in there. Looks like we got a few other folks having succeeded. Apparently, my mom is one of them, which is really surprising because she doesn't know anything about VBA. All right. So that's really all there is to it. It is what we did last time was we formulated a structured query language select statement to be able to bring data back. In a sense, it's even easier to put data in because you're just formatting a structured query language insert statement, but you don't even have to worry about the second object. You just execute it on the connection. But I would like to actually build this example out so that it does what we're after. So right now, what we're doing is we're passing in the active sheet and the active cell. So what I'd like to do is I would like to go ahead and figure out how can we get that information. So from the active sheet, I think we can just ask for the name. Yeah, so that's sheet 1. That's the currently active sheet. So that active sheet is coming into this using the SH parameter. So down here, instead of sheet 1, let me just go ahead and change this to be a parameter here. And in fact, let's do it this way. So I'm showing you now a pattern that will work really well for the project that we're doing, because what we have to do is we've got to say, here's kind of the general structure of this insert statement, but now let's change it. We're going to execute it multiple times, but it's going to have different values each time it executes. So instead of having these values hard-coded in here, let me just take sheet 1 here with even the quotes that are around it. I'm going to get rid of that. And I'm going to put in here just some text that I'm going to replace. Maybe I'll just do it with square brackets. And I'll call this sheet name. Or maybe just sheet. Now, if I were to try to run this, it would fail because this is not valid SQL syntax. It doesn't allow me just to put in brackets, some set of characters here. It needs to have those single quotes around it. So one approach would be for me to take this statement and kind of build it up with different variables. But instead of saying I'm going to start with a not fully formed SQL statement, structured query language statement, and build it up, I'm going to say, give me the full thing written out with some parameters in it, and then I'll just replace the parameters. So my SQL is starting out this way, and then I'm going to come here. You know what? I just want to actually change everywhere inside that SQL. I'll use the replace function. I'm going to look at SQL, and every time it says square bracket sheet, I want to replace that with single quote. Oh boy, that's tough to see. Single quote inside of double quotes with the font that I've got chosen here. Let's do it this way. Question mark. What's the ASCII value of my single quote character? It's number 39. So I'm going to put on here character number 39. That's a single quote concatenated with SH, the name of the parameter that the sheet is being passed to, dot name. oops, and I want to concat, the plus would actually work here, but I'm going to concatenate it. The ampersand is better for this. And then character number 39 on the end. And then I'll close my function for replace. So this is saying, here's where I've defined SQL with this parameter in here. Now, this parameter is not a parameter in the world of structured query language. There is such a thing as putting a parameter in a query in SQL, but that's not what we're doing. What I'm doing here is I'm just saying I'm putting these characters that I know I'm going to look for, open bracket, capital SHEET, close bracket, and then I'm going to replace that myself, which is with VBA, to put in that quote and then the actual name of the sheet with the other quote. And let me go ahead and stop right here. We'll debug print SQL. Yeah, I'll stop just before I execute it. And maybe I'll print the SQL before I change it as well. So we've established the SQL. I'm going to print it. I'm going to change the SQL and print it again, and then we'll stop. Okay, so the first one is my parameterized version, and we can see that it's got that square bracket parameter in it. And then we can see that it's got, the second time it prints out, it's brought in the actual name of the sheet. So just because it was sheet one before, let me change the name of my sheet. I'll call this my data sheet. And now if I run this again, we'll see that it reads it in with data as is. It is reading the name off of the sheet, really is. And so now if I were to execute that all the way through, I should see, here it is, data, my data sheet. It looks like someone executed it without actually changing it. That's okay. But what this means is that, like, for that to actually work, that student must have left the single quotes out here. And having the single quotes out there is a little simpler because I don't have to put them on down here. It's kind of a pain to have to put them on right here. But I'm going to prefer to put them on out here because if the value is missing, it's going to be kind of difficult to deal with those single quotes otherwise. So we're going to see an example of that here in just a second. So I'm building this intentionally without putting the single quotes around the data that I know is probably going to need single quotes in there. Okay, so I'm bringing in a reference to a range called target. So let's do this. Let's say that my formula here, this is just the formula of the target cell. So I'm going to make this into a parameter called formula. And then after replacing that, I'm going to replace formula with single quote and then the formula. So that's target.formula. So I think that's going to work just fine. So let me save this and run it again. TARGET. And we'll run it through. We don't need to be printing this starting one anymore. Okay, so yeah, my formula is blank. This is actually kind of interesting. So let me go ahead and it's asking for the active cell. So let me come and actually put a formula in here. So my active cell is going to be D4. This equals 5 plus 5. I'll run this again. And so now it's brought in that formula. But the interesting thing here is like, this is a little problem with, it's kind of a difficult thing with relational database management. And that is, how do we handle the absence of a value? So let me just look, I'm going to put a where clause on this that gets a little more specific here. So I'm going to say where the event ID is greater than 430. Greater than 430. Okay, so far so good. Now, some of these have no value in here, and some of them actually have a value. So I just want to see the ones that don't have a value. So where the event ID is greater than 430 and the formula is equal to a quote, quote. This is similar to how we do it in VBA. FOR. And that should narrow it down a bit. Yeah, so I've got 1, 2, 3, 4. Now, I got 5 values. Here's the problem. In this case, I'm not saying where there's no value. What I'm saying is, I'm saying where there's a string with 0 characters. And this is a really difficult idea when we're first starting with database management, because that really looks like it's no value, but no value is really different than a string with 0 characters. And it might even help us to think about what happens, like how does memory get allocated for a string? Strings are variable length data type in VBA. And you might remember there's some overhead. Anyone, I know it's past the midterm, so you probably flushed this out of your memory, but there's some overhead. What's the overhead involved with every string? Before we record anything about the characters, we record something else in that string. It's 4 bytes that we do with it. Anyone know what we do with those first 4 bytes? We record, oh, go ahead. No, we know it's a string, and so the interpreter keeps track of that. It's telling us how long the string is. So if it's like an integer, we know it's only 2 bytes. If it's a long, it's 4 bytes. If it's a byte type, it's 1 byte. But the string is variable length. So the first 4 characters record a number that says how long the string is. So if it's an empty string, it takes 4 bytes of RAM, because those first 4 bytes say 0, and then there's no other data beyond it. If it's just a single character, the first 4 bytes are a number that says 1, and the total length of the string then is 5 bytes. The 4 bytes that say how long it is, plus 1 byte to say which character is being stored. So the point is that a 0-length string is not the absence of anything, because like it takes some data to say this is a string with nothing in it. In the world of database management, we want to be able to say the absence of a value. Like even if like there's some number that doesn't have a value. And so there's an idea called null. It's actually a similar one in VBA, which we're not really going to spend much time with. So really the right way to do this is to say, I'm interested not where the value is a 0-length string, but where the formula is null. We often write it in uppercase, although this case doesn't matter here. So what we're saying here is, show me the records where there is no value for the formula. And when I submit this, it's going to give me no records, because those records that we saw moments ago have a value. What's the value? It's a 0-length string. And so it's like a no-no to record a 0, like if you've got no value, to actually plug in a 0-length string into a field where you want to say there's no value there, because this is the way you ask for something where there's no value. And so what I want to do in the case where like the active cell doesn't have a formula in it, instead of putting a 0-length string there, I want to actually tell it to put a null value, this reserved keyword in structured query language that allows us to say, yeah, there's no value here. There's actually a couple of ways I could do it. And then I could do it this way. I could say, well, get rid of the word formula and then just don't supply anything. That would give us the absence of a value. Or I could say, get rid of the word formula and plug in here, I'm gonna do it up here, and plug in here the keyword null without quotes. So in this case, what I'm saying is, hey, I'm going to insert something into my work log table. Here's the columns I'm putting values into. And for username, I'm putting in srees. For workbook name, I'm putting in this. And for formula, oh, I tricked you. I'm not really putting a value in for formula. That's what this says. This says don't put a value in for formula. I know I said put a value in, but don't really put a value in. So it really is exactly the same. If I do this, it's exactly the same as if I just don't include the formula column. And you can see why this would be different. Like if I had the formula in there, and I supplied a zero length string for that formula, like that, 2 single quotes with nothing in it, then you can see that's different than not putting a value in there at all. And so as I'm formulating this, if I'm saying, I don't really, there's no formula in this cell. I don't want to put anything in that table. I have 2 options. One, get rid of the word formula and just don't put a value for it, or to plug that in with null. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to look at this right here, and I'm going to execute this conditionally. So I'm going to say if, then, else, and if. And what I'm going to say here is that if the target's formula is empty, I'll do one thing. Otherwise, I'll do something different. So if target formula is equal to an empty string, then instead of replacing formula with a quote and the formula and another quote, I'm going to replace it with the word null. Now, if I were to place it with null with single quotes around it, and just kind of highlight that so you can see the single quotes in there, that would actually put the 4 characters N-U-L-L in there. I don't want that. I want to tell it use the keyword null, not in quotes, so that it goes, oh yeah, just don't put a value. This gets a little bit confusing because you might be tempted to say, oh yeah, don't put any quotes around it at all. And unfortunately, that's valid VBA syntax because the notion of null, the absence of a value, is a real thing in VBA as well. But what I have to do is I have to actually build up a string that has those 4 characters, N-U-L-L, in it. And so it's got to have double quotes. It's confusing. Double quotes, no single quotes, so that I can get the reserved SQL word N-U-L-L in there. And case doesn't matter, but I'm going to go ahead and put it back in capital. So now I'm going to go ahead and run this. And I do have a formula here. So I'm going to run my code. And we can see that it has put in that formula here. But if I'm on a different active cell where there is no formula, now it should bring in null without any quotes around it. And so I should now have executed one that actually is null. So we've got a few now where it's respecting, it actually is saying, oh yeah, that's the absence of a value. And so, yeah, mine's the data sheet and several of you are still on sheet 1. If I say formula equals single quote, I won't get these anymore. I'll get other ones that are going to look similar to them. But this is 50, 51. This is 47, 49, 50, and 51. Those will be gone. Got other ones here, but 49, 50, 50, 51, whatever they were, those aren't there. And it's because zero length string is really different than the absence of a value. Null is always kind of a hard idea. Show me how comfortable you are with null, 0 to 5. 5, 5, 5, 5, 3, 3, 2. Okay. But that's going to be something that you're going to have to deal with in the FBI data that you're using for this project, is kind of say, we've got some of these that don't have a value. How do we express that in the database? All right, let me come here and deal kind of with another issue. I'm going to come here and say, I'm going to call this my sales data. So now instead of data, I'm calling it sales space data. And this is going to cause That space going to be a problem? Yeah, I think that would be okay. So let me add, I think that's okay. If I was to run this with that, I think that's going to work just fine. Get back to my VBA, run that. Yeah, executes just fine. I should have something showing sales data in my data now. I'll get rid of my and clause. Or if here it is, sales data. But if I have a reference to that sheet, let me add another sheet here. We'll just call this sheet 1. And I'm going to say this equals that cell that has the 10 in it here. So now my formula is referring to data on another sheet. And I think this code is going to fail when I try to execute this one. Let's see if we can track down why. Incorrect syntax near sales. So I'll debug this and I'll bring this down for you to take a look at it. And what is the problem? Is it big enough? Should I zoom in on it a little bit? Insert into work log. I'll bring this down. Values, I'll bring these down. That's as big as I can make it conveniently. So this was working before, but now there's something about my formula that's making it fail. Anyone want to tackle what it is? Go ahead. It's actually not a single quote around the equal sign, but that is the problem. You look at it, you think, oh, look, that's a single quote and equal signs. And that's exactly how the structured query language interpreter sees it. This is no problem to VBA because in VBA, I'm just making a string. VBA is like, put whatever you want to in that string. But when I send this string over to SQL Server, it has to understand what I'm asking it to do. And it says, great, insert into. So I totally know what we're doing. We're adding data to a table. What table? Work log. And it goes, oh yeah, I know what that table is, work log. And then it goes opening parentheses, great, we're getting a column list. And it says, oh yeah, those are all columns in that table. I've got this figured out. It's like feeling good. At this point, it's going, yeah, we're doing great. And it gets to values, super, we're supplying a list of values. Open parenthesis, yep, that's what we need. And then it goes single quote. Great, this is just a string literal, SRESE, close single quote. Great, that's what we're putting in. Comma, super, we're going on to the next one. Single quote, here's the characters are going into the next column. Comma, or end of the string literal, single quote, same thing. It gets to this one, and it goes single quote, equal sign, single quote, great, we're putting an equal sign into that one, and it gets to that S right there, and it goes, I was expecting a comma, and I did not find a comma. I don't know what to do with this. That's the error that we're getting. And what does the error say? I'm not even sure it's a very good error. Incorrect syntax near sales. Yeah, that's not bad. Like it got to right here and went, not what I was expecting. And it's because I'm trying to insert a single quote. What does this mean? Am I not allowed to put a single quote into my database? Well, I can put a single quote in the database, but it's a little bit weird how I have to do it. So let's think about this like here, like in VBA. What if I wanted to say, I want to just print a string literal here that says, when you meet the man, say hello. You see that we have a similar problem here. So I'm going to try to print this, and it's like, okay, single quote, or it's got a quote here. It's like, great, this is a string literal up to here. It's going to get to there, and it's going to go, hello. I'm not sure what this is. It may actually try to go, oh, maybe that's just a variable. This may fail or it may not fail. Yeah, this doesn't fail here because the immediate window is like, oh, you probably just meant to put a concatenation in there, and So it's concatenating it. So let me instead put it into, so you can see the error, I'm going to put it into a sub procedure here. tgest. It's a great name. Okay. So instead of printing it, I'm just going to say const x equals. And when I try to run that, so I got a syntax error. So here it's saying, great, we get up to here, string literal, and then it gets to this hello, and it's like, what is that? You're not concatenating it. I'm not expecting more than one value here. What's going on here? So how do we solve this in VBA? How do we actually put a double quote into a double quote coded string literal? So in more modern languages, you'd say, no problem, just use single quotes to mark the whole string. And then we go, oh, this string has done that in single quotes. But what does that mean in VBA? It's a comment, yeah. So it's kind of unfortunate that they kind of burned the single quote character as the comment character because it would be so useful other ways. So no, that's not how we do it. Anyone know how to do it? Yeah, I guess I haven't taught you this yet. It's a weird way. Here's what we do. Is when you get to that double quote there, instead of putting one, you put two right next to each other. And now what the VBA interpreter says, it goes double quote, great. This is like, we got it going on, string literal, string literal, string literal, string literal, string literal, string literal. And it goes, oh, I think that's the end of the string literal. But wait a minute, that could be a quote inside the string literal. Let me just peek at the next letter, the next character. And if it's a quote, oh, that wasn't really the end of the string literal. That's a quote inside the string literal. We're still in the string literal, still in the string literal. Oh, that could be the end, but let me peek. Oh no, the next one's the same thing. So it's still in the string literal. Oh, I think I'm at the end. Let me peek. The next character, there's a next character. That is the end of the string literal. So now if I was to say debug.print x and run that, it should print that string up there. When you meet the man, say hello, those quotes. So that's how you do it in VBA. Well, how do you do it in structured query language? And the answer is it's exactly the same in structured query language. I think the guys writing VBA learned it from structured query language. That's how they decided how to do it. And so I've got to get this to look like single quote there, and that single quote, that there's the beginning and there's the end of my string literal. And so that's going to say, plug it in, but it will actually treat those as a single quote. So anywhere that I have the possibility of there being a single quote in my data, I've got to anticipate it and do that with it. Here's what I can do. See, I don't need it where it's null. I've lost myself. Yeah, so when I'm plugging in null, there's no possibility of having a single quote there. But at this point right here, that could need to have a single quote in it. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm just going to use the replace function right around this. This is getting kind of ugly. We're going to simplify it here in just a minute, but let's go ahead and get this part working. Replace. I'm looking at the formula, comma, I'm going to look for something and then replace it with something. Oops. I'm looking for character 39, single quote, and I'm replacing it with, that's just hideous. I'm going to do it with character 39. Character 39 concatenated with character 39. Oof, I don't know if that's any better. So this little replace right here is saying, take the formula in, find every occurrence of a single quote and replace it with two single quotes right next to each other. What's that going to do if there's no single quotes? It's going to replace every one, all 0 of them. And so it won't have any effect if the single quote's missing, but if the single quote is there, every single quote inside that will get replaced with two single quotes side by side. And then we'll have a single quote in front of it and in back of it to indicate that it's a string literal. So now that one should go through. So if I execute that, yeah, it runs without error. And if I look at my data, then I'm getting that in with the single quotes is coming in. Now, yeah, notice it's not two single quotes that actually goes in. It actually goes in as a single quote, because putting the two in there is just like a code to tell the interpreter this isn't really two single quotes. It's a single quote inside of this single quote terminated string literal. Okay. Ooh. So what I would like to do is I would like to simplify my life and help you simplify your life while you're doing this project. So let's write a function that will kind of look at a value and get it ready to go into a structured query language statement. So instead of having to kind of like for every one that we're writing, have to do this kind of ugly thing around it, let's just write that ugliness once. And then we can call this function that we're creating every time we need to kind of prepare a value to get inserted into an insert state. Let me just create a function right here called prep SQL val. Going to take some data in, and it's going to return a string. Here's what I'd like to do. Just like in VBA, if I have a numeric literal, there's no quotes involved. I can just write like 7 in my code. I can take, the new value, the value of X is going to be Y plus 7. Numeric literals don't take any kind of mark, but string literals, because we don't want to get confused with reserved words, have to have the quotes around them. So if what I send in here is a number, then I just want to send the number back. If what I send in here is blank, it's empty, then I want to send back null. Otherwise, I want to send back the value with quotes around it and any single quotes doubled up on the inside. So let's do this. Let's just say if is numeric data, then our prep SQL function is going to equal just data by itself. So if you sent a number, I'm just going to give you back the number. No more work needs to be done. There's not going to be a single quote in the number. No number has a single quote in it. It doesn't have to have quotes around it because it's a numeric literal. So you gave me a number, the number goes back. Otherwise, let's see if it's empty. Else if data equals a zero-length string, then else if no space, then prep data is going to send back the keyword null. If neither of those things are true, then this must be a string literal. Then we're going to send back, in fact, let me just copy this right here because this is close to what I'm after. Else, my prep SQL value is equal to a single quote and replace whatever you sent me in data. Look for every single quote inside of data and replace it with 2 single quotes and then wrap single quotes around it. Oof. Well, that's not the prettiest statement ever written, but at least it's only ugly here. So now as I'm working up here, I can make this a lot simpler. So instead of having to have the condition out here, because I'm handling the condition about whether it's empty down here, I can just say SQL equals what it used to be, look for formula and replace it with, and then here I'll call prep SQL value. and pass, whoops. Here I'll call prep SQL value, and I'm going to pass in, oh shoot, I deleted it. What was here before? Target.formula. So now whatever's in the formula, if the formula is blank, it won't be numeric. It will be seen, it'll be a zero length string. And so we'll just send back null. If there is a formula in there, it'll wrap single quotes around it and replace any single quotes that are in it with doubled up single quotes. So now the code up here where I'm actually doing the work to modify my SQL is much simpler. And I've got this prep SQL down here that I can now do with any value that I want to insert into my structured query language insert statement. So I'm going to do the same thing with this one. I'm just going to, I don't know if that sheet name might have a quote. Can you put a single quote in a sheet name? My guess is you're not allowed to put a single quote in a sheet name. But still, I've got this thing working. I'm just going to go ahead and do it. Instead of sale data, I'll put Dave's data. What do you think? Do you think that's a legal sheet name? I don't think so. Oh, it is. Excellent. So good. That means that the sheet name is going to be handled as well. I don't even know what that looks like now on my formula. Oh yeah, it doubled it up. Look at that. It does the same thing in regular Excel, not just VBA. Cool. All right, so I'm going to do the same thing on this one. So now I'm looking for my parameter and replacing it with the prepped value. And my prepped SQL value is like, I'll take a look at this and figure out if I need to put quotes on it, if I need to double up the quotes, whatever. So looks pretty good. Let me just go ahead and kind of build these other ones out. Here's the username. So I'm going to put a argument around this one. So it's getting rid of the value and the quotes. Let me just put in UN for username. Then I'll have a replace statement here as well that looks for UN and replaces it with, I think I can actually read the username like from the, like I can ask VBA what the person's username is. And it's called application.username. So it's just a property of the workbook itself that can tell me what the user's name is. So here's my sheet name, which should be pretty easy as well. So this is my book, name. I'll just call it book. Now replace book with, let's say sh, the worksheet dot parent, which will be the workbook that holds the worksheet dot name. sh.parent.name. I thought that would be it. Just check for a moment. Yeah, that looks right. So what did I have wrong? Oh, I needed a second closing parenthesis. Thank you. This is, that'll just be my cell, the cell address. So cell, and now this is going to be my target. This is great. Like we've done address forever. And I'm going to show you something new about it. So address, but it turns out address takes arguments. Row absolute, false, column absolute, false. And that will suppress the $signs that normally show up in the address. So prep SQL is going to be my target's address. target.address without the dollar signs. We are really humming. And the last one here then is just a value. After I do the formula, and the order really doesn't matter here, but I'm just trying to keep them in the order that they show up. And value will be the target's value. All right, give it a shot and see what it does. I'm going to change this to say D4 plus 4. Oh, that's not triggering it yet. I still have to run it by running my runner. Uh-oh. That's some incorrect syntax. And you'll notice that I'm printing SQL just before I get to that problem, which is nice because I can kind of look and see what the problem is. Near write DB24. Oh yeah. Is that 2 single quotes? It makes me think I left the single quotes in. Oh, I sure did. Those single quotes need to come out for my parameters. Try it again. No error. And let's see how it logged. There it is, Dave's data. Oh, wait a minute. Why does it have double quotes? Why does it have 2 quotes? How come there's 2 here?
Excel reads it has 2, and then you replace each of them with 2.
That's exactly right. Like if we look at what I actually inserted, it was like, it's got a quote in the front of the string literal, and it's got 2 quotes there, 4 quotes there, 2 quotes there, and then a single quote on the end. Let's look at it. Here's the formula. Yeah, single quote, 2 single quotes, those are separate, and there's 4 right here. To get those 2 single quotes side by side, my code had us put those into 4. And it did, because it replaced every single quote with 2 single quotes. Okay, well, we are humming on this example. So, in fact, I think we've got it kind of fully built out. And did it actually get my username? Oh yeah, look, that's my username. Read that off my workbook. Now we know Trenton Griffin is following along. Nice work, Trenton. You really have 3 T's in your name? Where are you? Cool. All right. Now, so 2 more things that I want to do. First, I would like to actually make this work by have it actually record when the user changes a cell. And then I want to have it hit the Access database instead of the SQL Server database. So it turns out we're used to thinking about event-driven code for forms, but you can also do event-driven code for worksheets and for workbooks. Let's see how to do it. And that's the whole reason why we have these, like these sheets right here. Well, one is that, yeah, you can change the code name of the sheet and some other properties of it. But let me come to, these are actually, there's actually a module behind each one of these. So I'm going to double click where it says this workbook. So that has opened up a module that's for this workbook. And so now I can say, what's the object that I want? Well, there's not many to choose from. General, meaning no object at all, and the workbook, like the object that it could respond to is the workbook. And now that I've got the workbook selected here, I've got different events that it can respond to. And in this case, I want to know when there's a change on a sheet change. So a change on a sheet, every time there's a change on a sheet, this code is going to get triggered. And you'll notice that it passes in a reference to the sheet that it is on and a reference to the cell, or I should say the target, because it could be more than one cell. So now when this happens, I just want to pass those 2 things onto my record edit function. We come back to my module and like it's just called record edit. And then I pass in those two values. So this is just going to call record edit. It's going to pass SH, reference to the sheet, and it's going to pass target, the reference to this cell. That should activate the code by me just changing a cell. You go ahead and do it. I'm going to come here and change this one and say this equals that cell right above it times 2. You might have seen it plug this value up there as it ran. Let me go ahead and run my query. And there it is, D4 plus 2. That's not mine, though. Mine doesn't say Cole's. The sheet's not Cole's data. My sheet is. What's that? Sheet. No, mine's not. Oh, was I on sheet 1? I was on sheet 1. Yeah, I was on sheet 1. Thank you. E16 times 2. Yes. Thought it was over here. Change a reference here. This equals that divided by 2. Then I should see my Dave's data because I made the change on Dave's data. Now, what's going to be a problem is if I'm like, you know what, let me change multiple cells together. 4 here, let me copy that. Change those 4 cells simultaneously, and that's a problem. What's the problem? I don't know. You get type mismatch. So what is data? What am I sending in? Type name of data. It's a variant array. This is an array of variant. Because it's like, oh, you're trying multiple cells. All my code assumes I'm doing 1 cell at a time. So I think my fastest way forward on this is to say, for now, 1 cell at a time is fine. So let's just do this. Let's just come back to the workbook. And let's only record the edit if it's a single cell. So if target.cells.count equals 1, then we'll record the edit. And that should just say if you're editing more than 1 cell at a time, we don't want to see it. If we did want to see it, we'd have to do something more sophisticated here. Either like record multiple cells, which could be kind of hard if he changes like 10. Can you change 10,000 cells at a time? Yeah, pretty easily. So I probably don't want to run 10,000 individual insert statements if that happens. So I'd probably want to be a little more circumspect about that. Maybe record the first cell and say how many cells were changed and give the address of what the whole thing that was changed or something like that. But I think this will work reliably. So as long as there's only 1 cell being edited, we're going to log that cell. So I think I'm ready to switch this over to look at access. So we have on our worklog.accdbs, that's an access database file. So if you download that access database file and put it in the same location as your workbook file, I think our code is already set up to find it. So come back to module 1. And instead of setting my connection string for SQL Server, I'm going to set my connection string for Microsoft Access. Yeah, the data source is this workbook's path. And so /worklog.accdb. So just going to assume that that workbook is in the same folder as your database. And that's the connection string that we need to connect to a database. This says the provider is not SQL Server. Up here, my driver is SQL Server. This says, oh, there's a thing called provider, and it's taken that as the ACE OLADB 12.0. I also just supply the data source, which is the path to the workbook, and that's all it takes to connect onto an Access database, as long as the database isn't password protected. You can password protect an Access database, in which case I'd have to provide username and password as well. And I'm not sure exactly like what keywords we'd use for that, but that would be, easy to look up. So now let me just go ahead and open up that database and take a look at it. So here's my work log database. I'll double click it. It should open up Microsoft Access. It has blocked this because it's untrusted. All right, let's go trust it. Right click, properties, unblock. Open it up. And here's my work log database. It's empty right now. Some active content, enable content, whatever that means. Okay, so now my code should be, instead of writing up to the Microsoft SQL Server that's in the cloud, it should be writing to my local database. So let me just go ahead and make a couple of changes here. I'll delete that one. Oh. I might have been in break mode. Let me try that again. I'll delete this one. Nope. All right. Let's see what's the problem here. Oh. So by deleting it, I had nothing here. Seemed like that should have gone back to null. All right, I'm going to deal with that problem here in just a minute. So let's just record it by putting some data in. Put in 12. I put in 12 by equaling 6 plus 6. That should be good. That should have entered 2 records into this database. Oh no, it didn't go in. Well, it's hard to say because Access doesn't automatically update. So I'm just going to cause this to, I'll just close it and open it again. And there's my 2 records, one with 12. I don't know how to zoom in. And then one with 6 plus 6. So like my code literally works exactly the same, just with a different connection. And that's one of the great things about the way that like the whole connection to database is set up. Once you get connected onto your database, that structured query language is going to be the same. There's sometimes some differences, like how Excel or how Access handles dates is different than how Microsoft SQL Server handles dates. But in many cases, like your code works exactly the same. And that's the case here. Okay, so I think the last thing I got to do is find out why I'm getting a blank value when I delete that on the end. So let me go ahead and trigger that error again with my clean break here. Delete a value. It's causing an error. And let's take a look at this. So it brought back null for this. Null was the formula. Yeah, the address is coming in as G4. Formula is getting null, but my cell value is coming back as a blank string. Okay, so I think what I want to do is put like is numeric data. It was like this is coming back as is numeric. Really? The 0-length string is coming back as is numeric? Maybe, oh, yeah, is numeric of active cell dot value. And we go on to an empty cell. That's coming back true. That's really unfortunate. That's not numeric. There's nothing in that cell, and that is not a number. Curse the people who wrote this language. So what should I do? Let's do this. Let's just change the order of these. Let's say if, you come up here and say, if the length of data is equal to 0, then we'll return null. I'm pretty sure the length of the active cell is 0. Yeah. So if the length, return another, else if it's numeric, just return the number, else return that. So let's give that, so we just changed it to say our first thing we're checking to see is if the length of whatever we passed in is 0. Then return null. Otherwise, if it's numeric, return the number. Otherwise, treat it like a string. Save, I haven't saved for a while. I'm going to save that. And let's just try it again now to delete a cell. Yeah, now deleting it doesn't cause an error. Let's see if it's logging it. Refresh. Yeah, it's logging it just fine. It's brought these in as no formula, no cell value, no formula, no cell value. But it's giving me the cells that were changed and when they were changed. Oh, how am I getting the time? Am I inserting the time? I don't think I'm inserting the time. So it turns out this table is set up, and the one in SQL Server as well. If I come into design view on this and look at the time, it's set up to default to the current time. It must be. But it's like, I don't remember where to set that default up. I would have thought it was here. Event time. Oh, default value is now. There it is. It's tiny. So the database is set up to say, if you enter a record, you don't give me a value, what value should I put in? Just read the current time off. We could send that value in. Working with dates gets a little more complex, and we certainly can't do it in the next 3 minutes. So folks, I would highly recommend that like you take this approach to doing your, like setting up the queries that you have to execute. As you're working through those worksheets to pull in the data and put it into the database, I think you're going to be executing like it's thousands and thousands of queries. Like to process through all those files, you're going to execute thousands of times. I don't remember if it's 5,000 or 9,000, but it's definitely more than 5,000. And so, man, I would just copy this, bring it in, and just take this approach to building up how you're specifying your queries. Any questions? You now have heard everything that I'm going to teach in class that will prepare you for that project. So you can dive into it. All right, folks, thanks for coming. I will see you on Wednesday. Class dismissed. Thank you.